and welcome back to the What the Falk podcast at the Euros. It feels like it started just yesterday, 2 weeks to be precise, but the Euro 2024 quarterfinal stages are here, and England, if you choose to be positive, are just 3 games away from potential glory thanks to some last-minute Jude Bellingham genius. But standing in their way is obviously an impressive Switzerland side who have swatted aside the reigning champions Italy in the last 16. They'll hope to do exactly the same again this Saturday with the Three Lions, and whether they can do it or not, I don't really know. But to join me to give me a bit more insight is Scottish-born Swiss football expert Craig King. Craig, how are you doing, mate? You all right?
Yeah, I'm all good, man. Thank you for having me on.
Pleasure, mate. Absolutely not a problem in the slightest. We'll sort of start straight away. England, Switzerland on a Saturday, which is nice, 5 o'clock. How much are you looking forward to the game?
Yeah, very much so. You know, these two countries have played quite a lot, quite recently, actually. In qualifying, they played in a friendly a couple of years ago that I was lucky enough to go to. And then I seen as well, they've both qualified for 5 of the last 8 Euros at the same time, and they've played in 3 of those 5. So, yeah, it seems like there's been a lot of matchups in recent history that certainly England have had the better of, but I don't think there's ever been a time where Switzerland go into a game like this in such a confident mood and where there's such a belief they can get a result. You know, I can imagine in all those games past, certainly in the qualifiers and things like that, that England would have been the clear favourites and there was really no kind of chance that Switzerland would cause an upset. But for the first time, it really feels like it could happen. You know, England, don't get me wrong, still favourites, but I think there's doubt in everybody's head that about how this match could go, which isn't normally the case.
No, absolutely. And I've watched a fair few of the Switzerland games. I actually missed the opening game, but the most important game, I think, from a Swiss perspective, was that last 16 game against Italy, which, to be honest, I had a feeling that Switzerland would do well, but the ease in which they kind of, as I said in the intro, swept Italy aside, who are the reigning champions, always seem to turn up in tournaments when they're in them. But I thought it could have ended up a lot more than 2-0. What did you personally make of Switzerland's 2-0 win over Italy? Was it as easy as expected?
Well, you know, Italy still carry that name value. They might not be the team that they once were, but you get drawn against Italy and there's still a part of you that's like, oh no, it's Italy. But there was a lot of confidence going into that game because of how Italy had performed. And of course, Switzerland, as you kind of alluded to, have been, you know, a tournament team for such a long time now that have done so well, so consistently. And after beating France at the last Euros, going into this match, you know, there's always that confidence that they could do it. But I think it was still surprising the manner of that result because for me, it was, as long as I've been covering Swiss football, which is since about 2013, they've had a lot of good tournament performances. You know, that France one sticks to my mind and I'll bring it up about 18 times and while we're chatting because it's such an important moment. But yeah, that France game was so good because it was such a shock and such an achievement. But the manner of that match against Italy, where Switzerland just took control of the game, and yes, there was maybe a couple of moments where they almost shot themselves in the foot. Fabian Schär hit the post, hit his own post, that could have let Italy back into the game. But apart from that, there wasn't really a lot of chances where Italy were going to come back into it, and Switzerland could have won it by more. And even 5, 6 years ago, obviously, Italy's success has kind of dwindled since they won the Euros. But if you'd said that to anyone back then, they'd have been like called you a fool, really, because Switzerland don't tend to have that much control in a game against one of the more elite nations. So for me, it's probably one of the best Euros performances that I can remember for a different reason than what the France one was.
Absolutely. And I thought, like, from minute one, Switzerland controlled it, and the only chance that Italy really had a chance of getting back into the game was from kind of the slight errors that Switzerland made. But I think you touched on the France game there as well. So in the past 2 tournaments, there's been what would we class as elite or big nations being beaten by Switzerland, which would maybe be classed as maybe not far from a small nation, but not elite in the same level. But how much confidence does the fact that they beat France in the last tournament, they've now beaten Italy with consummate ease. How much confidence has that given sort of Swiss fans, pundits, and those alike that they can not just beat England, but maybe kind of be that nation that potentially does a Greece, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, you know, I think that the last kind of few tournaments this gave that confidence more than ever. I think it's been something that's been building since 2014 when this run of qualifications and for the tournament itself and getting out of the group stage began. There was a while where Switzerland were getting out of the group stage and they were running into teams. They lost to Argentina in 2014 and then 2016 and 2018 they lost to Sweden and Poland, which were games that, those two at least, were games that they were kind of expecting to, maybe take that next step. It wasn't a given, but they were similar teams they were playing, and that didn't happen. And then they went into 2020 and they're like, this really has to be the time where we try and take that next step into the quarter final. And of course, paired up with France, it's almost like, well, it's not going to happen this time around, And then it happened in the most ridiculous fashion, and they kind of took that next step. The first time since 1958 they reached a quarter final, and then they took Spain all the way in that quarter final, all the way to penalties. So all that just gives confidence, and I think Switzerland have tried to model themselves in a way, or at least tried to aspire to be a nation like someone like Croatia, who have reached major tournament finals and have had a really good run over the kind of same time period that Switzerland have had their own good run. And so that all of that gives them confidence going into this. And for me and a lot of people, this tournament is probably the best chance that Switzerland will ever have to get to a semi-final, get to a final, and really kind of have that surprise run. There was something similar in 2018. If they'd beat Sweden, then they would have ran into England in the quarter final, and then maybe after that they could have went further. But of course, they lost to Sweden, so it didn't pan out that way. But this time around, it seems like this is their best chance, and they're playing an England side that hasn't hit its top level, or the level at least we know that it can play at. So yeah, there's a lot of belief, so much belief, especially after the way they beat Italy.
I think as two people who live in Scotland, I'm not sure if you'll agree with me on this because obviously you know Switzerland better than I do, but it always felt like in that Group A when it came out, when you're looking at, where could Scotland go in this tournament? Could they get out of group stages? It felt like Germany were destined to win Group A. And then because of Hungary's form, you sort of felt like Hungary would potentially be the second place team. And then you thought, well, third place or best place third team would go between Scotland or Switzerland. And I remember, admittedly, before the tournament, I said, I think Scotland's key game is to beat Switzerland because I think Hungary are going to be quite comfortably in the second place. As it was, it didn't end up like that at all, which is an awful lot for my football knowledge. But the Swiss almost actually topped the group. So take out the equation that, they finished comfortably second. They almost topped that group because of the Germany game. If it wasn't for Falk's, I think 92nd minute equaliser. So from day dot, really, Switzerland with a win over Hungary, the draw against Scotland, the last minute equaliser for Germany, then a comfortable victory over Italy. It's been great since day dot. Why has it gone so well for Switzerland, in your opinion?
Well, there's probably a lot of relief after that group stage, because if you'd asked me before the qualifying for this tournament began, I'd have been very confident getting out of that group. Switzerland have done it since 2014, always qualifying quite comfortably against hard teams like Serbia, Brazil. They've always got results and qualified. But that qualifying campaign was so unlike Switzerland in terms of they conceded so many goals, they took so many late goals. Last 10 minutes of games, I think they conceded 5 times and dropped points. And this was not a hard group in comparison to the ones they'd had before. And like they had Israel, Romania, Kosovo, Andorra, and Belarus. So when you compare that to having teams like Italy in the group before, it just wasn't the same. So there was a lot of worry after that qualifying campaign. They finished second and they kind of scraped through because the quality of the rest of the group wasn't so great. So there was that fear that, is that going to be sorted before the tournament? The manager was under a lot of pressure. They had to come out and basically give him that vote of confidence. For me personally, I wasn't keen on him staying in the job for this tournament because I didn't really see how things would improve from what happened throughout a consistent period of time. That was a good 6 months or so where the team delivered the same kind of lacklustre performances. But then they went into this group stage, and before the tournament, I had them finishing second, I had them finishing third, I had them finishing fourth. Sometimes in my head, I had them finishing top as well. I just couldn't really place how they were going to perform. And then they played so well in that Hungary game in the first half, and then the second half, there was some kind of evidence of what we'd seen in qualifying. So again, I was still kind of a bit worried. And then the Scotland game, there was that draw that probably wasn't their best performance. And then, of course, they had a good game against Germany. So it's kind of progressed little by little. and they've shown themselves to be the team that they have been since 2014, and that's just mainly led to relief. And now that we know we're getting to Switzerland, that we all knew can turn up, now we can really believe again, but at the same token, I would say there was some arrogance after the Scotland game because one each draw, it was a pretty even game. I think Switzerland maybe had the better chances, but Scotland had the chance to win it at the end. And there was kind of belief, at least from what I could see on social media and things like that, that Switzerland should be beating a team like Scotland when really all these teams are really close knit, So that group could have really went anyway, and it was really a lot harder than I think some people, at least from a Swiss perspective, ranked it before it began. But yeah, that Germany game, it probably worked out in our favour that last minute goal went in because, as I mentioned before, we ended up on a side of the draw that's a little bit more favourable. Of course, there's no easy games, but when you look at that other side, when there's Germany, Portugal, France all on there, it's probably a bit nicer to be on this side. You don't necessarily want to concede 94th minute, 95th minute goals or whatever it was, but this one was a bit more welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you look at the other side of the quarterfinal games, and it wouldn't be my preference. Got to be honest. So I'm sure obviously you feel exactly the same. But I wanted to ask you about the manager. Obviously, an international legend, played like loads of games for Switzerland. Now been in charge of the national team for sort of 3 years. And sometimes I think before like a tournament, there can be discussions around whether a manager should be there or shouldn't be, or whether he's the right man to lead them into this tournament. Would it be his last tournament, and so on and so forth? You sort of alluded to it a little bit there. What is the view on Murat Yakin in terms of his job he's done so far, including this tournament as it stands?
Well, just to give some backstory on him before he got this job, he was at Basel, he was at a few Swiss clubs, but at Basel he won a couple of titles, and then he went to Spartak Moscow, and he kind of disappeared, and then came back in the second division with Schaffhausen in Switzerland. And it was from that job, he did a good job there. He took a team that's been kind of mid-table and was having them challenge at the top end of the table. But Vladimir Petkovic then left as Swiss manager, and there was a lot of speculation who would take over, and then they presented Murat Yakin. So it was a very kind of underwhelming choice because there can't be many instances where, at least in the men's game, where someone's coming from a second division team into the main national team job. It just doesn't really, I've never really heard of it before. So it was an underwhelming appointment. But then his first task, he went into the qualifying for the World Cup. He had that group with Italy, Bulgaria, Northern Ireland, and they conceded just 2 goals in the group. They drew twice with Italy. They topped that group. And of course, Italy, I'm pretty sure they lost the playoff to North Macedonia by finishing second. So to top that group, massive achievement. It kind of took a lot of weight off his shoulders because, as I say, there was that kind of worry about him if he was up to a job that massive, And yeah, he did so well, but then the qualifying, it didn't really go to plan. And there was kind of some of the interviews from players after games. It seemed like there was a kind of rift there a wee bit, and you wondered if it was just all going to kind of come to the tournament and one of those cases where the team just implodes and stuff. But again, now that he's got to this tournament, he's thrown tactical surprises in there. He's been a bit chaotic, but whatever he's doing, it's working, and suddenly everybody's on side again. Even myself, I was questioning in those first games. I'm like, what is he even playing at here? He's playing without a striker, or he's dropping Shaqiri, and I'm certainly not a football manager, but I was just questioning every kind of decision. But it's worked so far. So I think again, he's got everybody back on side, and whatever happens now, he's going to kind of, even if he stays or goes after this tournament, I think he's earned a lot of credit back. So whereas before it seemed like it was kind of on the edge, and he could have left kind of a bad legacy sort of thing after that qualifying campaign. But to credit him, he's turned that around, and he's done a fantastic job to really continue what Mark Hitzfeld and Vladimir Petkovic have done over the last 10 years.
I think when you look at players that performed well from the games and the moments I've seen, Xhaka has stood out an absolute country mile, which is perhaps not a surprise. Obviously, someone that British football fans knew from Arsenal, and he's had a fantastic season with Leverkusen, who have had an unbelievable season themselves, and he's learning more on top of what he already knew from one of the best defensive midfielders of the past sort of 20 years in Xabi Alonso. But he went down in the Italy game, and I remember the commentator saying like Swiss fans kind of like held their breath a little bit as it was he got up. But how important is Granit Xhaka for Switzerland in terms of like the way the team plays?
Absolutely massive, and he has been ever since he broke into the team pretty much. And it's funny because I've watched him consistently for the Swiss team pretty much every game he's played, and I've not always watched every club game, whereas it's the other way around for a lot of people. They've watched most of his club career and not his national team career. And for a long time at Arsenal, he didn't really reach the heights he's capable of until maybe the last season. So there was a lot of criticism. He had that moment where he came off the pitch at Arsenal and he was cupping his ears to the fans and he was being booed. And people are like, this guy he's not cut out for this level and he's not good enough. Whereas for the Swiss national team, he's always been fantastic. Even when he's went through those sticky patches at club level, he's always been consistent. I think it's now 6 Player of the Match awards in the last 20 tournament matches for him, which is quite an incredible record. And again, he's came to this tournament and been ultra consistent. And he just always is. There's sometimes there might be an over reliance on him. There was for a long time, him and Shaqiri. If you didn't have one of those players, you would really struggle in that. I think there still is that reliance on him. He's the most capped male Swiss player ever, which kind of shows his importance to 129 caps. And his performances this tournament have just been really, really good. And you mentioned that season with Leverkusen. That's probably his best club season he's ever had. So consistent. He's played a big part in what was an incredible season, and that kind of runs through a lot of the players in the Swiss team. Jan Sommer had his best clean sheet record at Inter this season. He's finally playing at a top club level. And then the guys at Bologna, 3 players at Bologna, who just qualified for the Champions League. Manuel Akanji, of course, at Man City winning the Premier League again. So there's a lot of players in there that have kind of taken a lot of good momentum from the club season into this tournament, and Xhaka is one of them. And again, he's just going to be so important for any game that Switzerland want to do well in. It used to be Shaqiri for the goals and Xhaka just to be that engine in the team, and he still is. He missed the game against Spain, I'm sure it was, in the last Euros, and Switzerland did okay without him, but his leadership and everything else, you need that in this team. And it's a scary thought when he does retire, who's going to step up and replace that void, because that is how important he is.
Looking at the rest of the Swiss team, like Xhaka is maybe the obvious one. Shaqiri's another one that people will know. But you've got Rodriguez, who plays at that left back as well, who's had a fantastic career. Obviously, formerly of AC Milan and Wolfsburg. For you, outside of the obvious names, who are the players that have like really shone in the Euros and really can cause England a problem on this weekend?
What I will say about Rodriguez is that, as I say, I've followed this team for such a long time, but it still surprises me when I see that his age is only 31, because he seems like he's been around forever. But yeah, he's one that's been a consistent part of this team, like so many, the core group since 2014, the players that everybody seems to know. But outside of that, you've got Michel Aebischer is probably the standout for this tournament. This is a guy that had a great season for Bologna. As I mentioned, some of those players, they helped him qualify for the Champions League. But he played just 14 minutes at the World Cup and he didn't make the last Euro squad. And then all of a sudden he's played every minute at this tournament and contributed massively. That first game, that was one of the decisions by the manager that I couldn't understand, dropping Shaqiri, bringing in Aebischer, and he assisted and scored in that game. And then again, he assisted in one of the later games as well. And he's played every minute. He's kept Shaqiri down to one game, which hasn't happened to Shaqiri since he was an 18-year-old and made a cameo appearance at the 2010 World Cup. So it just shows what a big influence he's had coming from nowhere and really, really delivering. Another player that I like that hasn't really been given much of an opportunity is Zeki Amdouni. I think he's going to be the striker that Switzerland have been missing for such a long time. Switzerland haven't had that kind of consistent goal scorer. They've had players like Haris Seferovic who can score goals, but not someone you can really rely on to find the net in those big moments. But Amdouni had a fantastic season at Basel, especially in Europe. He scored 7 goals in the knockout stages to help them reach the semi-final of that tournament. So he's one that he may still have his say in this tournament as well. He's obviously been kind of kept out by Gillian Bolo, who people know about. He's came back from a major injury over a year out. He hadn't played for the team since the World Cup defeat to Portugal. And he's come back and scored and done really well as well. And Remo Freuler, he's probably someone that not a lot of people know. He was at Nottingham Forest for a little while, but he's got 71 caps, and again, he comes up with big moments. He scored the winner against Serbia at the last World Cup to more or less take Switzerland into another knockout stage. So there's so many players and again, for the first time that I can remember, that you can kind of spread the goals and assists across the team. You're not relying just on Shaqiri, you're not relying just on Xhaka. You've got players like Abisher or Freuler who can step up and deliver in those big moments.
Hilariously, this will mean absolutely nothing to people who are listening to it via the audio, which is the only medium we do. But I started this podcast with sunglasses on because the sun was so bright coming through the window, and now we're having a shower. So if anyone's wondering what summer is like in Glasgow for both of us, there's just a little caveat into what you can expect in an interview. But back to the football. At risk of asking Swiss expert who obviously lives in Scotland about England's performances, I'm going to do that. I think, openly, admittedly, we've spoke after games, like myself and fellow podcasters, about how poor we've been. Look, it was a glorious moment for an England fan, the two late goals, or the late goal and then the extra time goal against Slovakia. But in truth, it was 94 minutes of as poor as I've seen England play. What have you made of England so far? Because I know that ultimately we haven't hit our levels, but I suppose we've got there in the end. And sometimes when you're an England fan or a Sunderland fan or whatever team it is that you support, you can be so ingrained in what you've seen that you kind of miss any level of balance. From an outside perspective, what have you made of England's first 4 underwhelming games, shall I say?
Yeah, I don't think anyone will disagree that they've not been to the level. They can play a lot better. They've got the players that can play a lot better than that. And it's difficult because this tournament's seen so many of the bigger teams kind of go really slowly through that group stage. Like they win one game and then that's almost enough to see them through. They only need to pick up another point. Even France, I think they scored like one goal from open play after that in their 4 games. So it's not just exclusive to England, but then you would have kind of hoped to see a better performance against Slovakia. And I don't think there was many shots on target until near the end. And that just really would set the alarm bells ringing for me personally if I was an England fan. But again, England have all these quality players like Bellingham, like Kane, that can pull them out of the fire like they did against Slovakia. It doesn't really matter that it's the 94th minute. For stress levels, I'm sure it'd have been nicer if it was earlier. But in the end, they got the result. They found that goal and then they took advantage of the Slovakia's tiredness and took it and got the other goal and went through, and they're another step closer. And who knows, this next game might be the one that they turn it on and all these big players kind of come to the party because they're more than capable. And that's the worry from a Swiss point of view as well. As much as England's performances can give confidence, if England turn up, then England probably should win that match. If they don't, then Switzerland have every chance. But also you have to be wary of the fact that you've got these players that have special moments of magic that can deliver as well. I think the frustrating thing for England is you just expect more, especially at this stage of the tournament. If you want to be a team that's going to win it, then you expect more. But if you win it playing this way somehow, then I don't think anybody's really going to care. But yeah, I can understand the kind of disappointment and the worry in those performances because you would expect that if those performances continue, then they aren't going to win it. But again, that's what gives Switzerland confidence too. Like after seeing those performances, there's not really anything to fear. Like same with Italy, there wasn't anything to fear. But of course, there's always that wariness of the absolute quality players that these teams still possess.
If there is any fear in the sort of Swiss fan base, would it be that after 4 really bad performances, the likes of Bellingham, Kane, Saka, whoever it may be, Foden, decide just to turn it on for this game and that becomes too difficult to handle if there is a fear within the Swiss fan base, even like 1%?
Yeah, like if these players turn up, they should beat Switzerland, and And the problem is, England beat Serbia, and then they obviously drew those two games, and then they were under so much pressure against Slovakia to kind of turn it around right at the end, and they did that. And I think that sort of moment can really give a lot of belief. That could change everything. That could give England the boost that they need to go on and just start playing like they can. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen. But yeah, of course, there's always a fear in those players. Like Swiss fans will look at Bellingham and Kane when the teams line up, and Foden and all these guys, and they'll be worried there because of what we've seen them do in the Premier League and what we've seen them do for England in the past. But there'll still be every belief that this team can match up to England. They have done in the past. In that friendly that I've mentioned before, they only lost narrowly at the end. They drew in the Nations League semi-finals a few years ago as well, and the last friendly before that it was a 1-0 defeat. So the record isn't great, but the matches are always quite tight, and that'll suit Switzerland. Try and get the first goal and see how England respond to that, because they haven't been creating chances freely. And if they can put that doubt back in England's mind, then maybe that will work in their favour. But at the same time, if these other players turn up for England, then they can just turn over Switzerland. There's still that, as much as Switzerland are probably just above the rest of the teams, like maybe your Scotland and teams like that, they will probably still get beaten by an England team that has those quality players if they come to the party.
Yeah, it's all about whether they turn up, which obviously is another podcast, another conversation entirely. But final question, you kind of alluded to it a little bit there about what you think Switzerland may hope to do, but what are your predictions for the game on Saturday? How do you see it swinging?
It's another one where I've had about 50 different scenarios in my head. I think if Switzerland turn up like Swiss fans know they can, like they did against Italy, then they've got every single chance of causing an upset. I think they would need to score first, and I think they'd also need to cut out any silly mistakes like against Italy when they almost scored the own goal. You can't do things like that. Ideally, they maybe get a couple of goals because you don't want to leave into the 90th minute, and then you have a situation like England had against Slovakia, and then it's taken away from you. So Switzerland really need to be at their top level. Everyone needs to turn up. Xhaka, Abisher needs to still be at the top of his game, and Bogo needs to take any chances that come his way. And if they do that, then they can beat England. But as I say, if England turn up, then it's not good news for Switzerland. I know I'm kind of sitting on the fence in a very Swiss way there, but I think it'll be a very tight game. To be honest, the fan in me is fearing the worst, and I think England will just edge it in the end up. Whether that takes extra time, penalties or beyond, I think it'll be England that goes through. But I think Switzerland will put up a fantastic effort and make it as difficult as possible for them.
I'll try and be confident and say 1-0, but I don't know if that's head or heart. But Craig, thanks for joining me, mate. Appreciate it. Obviously, from an England fan perspective, I hope you don't enjoy Saturday, but enjoy the rest of the Euros from there on in. And as always, thanks for joining me, mate. Appreciate it.
No problem, man. Thank you for having me on.